Dismissive avoidant partners rarely directly say things like, I'm done. Instead, they tend to show you in patterns. And if you know what to look for, then you will be able to foresee these signs that a dismissive avoidant may no longer be interested in sticking around. In fact, they may actually be about to discard you. And my hope by sharing this information today, these particular signs that we're going to cover, really some healing work for what you can do to address these things, both in the relationship dynamic before the discard happens, and also if it does, how you can heal, set your boundaries, make sure that you are looking out for yourself throughout this process. My hope is that by us diving in here today, you are going to be able to foretell whether or not these things might happen and have some semblance of control over how you choose to respond. Let's start by going through some major signs that this person might actually be able to do this. I'll save the biggest sign for the very end of this video because it is the big one that we want to be able to be prepared to heal through first. But some 3 high-level signs are: number 1, if you see this person shutting down emotionally. So we all know dismissive avoidants are fairly emotionally shut down. It's a very common theme of dismissive avoidant attachment style. However, when a dismissive avoidant is dating somebody, when they're getting to know somebody, when they're interested in that person, they will actually tend to ask you meaningful questions about yourself. They will try to get to know you. They'll try to figure out who you are in a relationship. They will have a sense of curiosity for and towards you in a relationship dynamic. If this suddenly changes, and if that is combined with seeing this person retreat even more than they usually do, these are signs that, hey, this person may be on their way out in this relationship. So that's number 1. Okay, we have 4 total. We're covering 3 here. Then we're getting into some other things. We'll save the last one for the end. The second one is if there are sudden devaluing behaviors or comments. Now, the reason for this is often what precedes a dismissive avoidant discard is that they will begin to flaw find. Now, a lot of when they discard somebody and they move on very suddenly in a relationship and not necessarily jump into a new relationship and rebound, but just like drop the relationship, seem to go on with their life. A lot of times, especially after long-term relationships, things are not always as they seem. But prior to this event taking shape, what you'll often see is that the dismissive avoidant, when they feel too vulnerable, when they feel like there's too much pressure for commitment, when they are feeling like there's too much that needs to be going on in the relationship, and they're just starting to doubt their ability to be in a relationship, they start looking for flaws in the relationship, they start having more deactivating strategies than usual. As you start to see these things, it's because at their core, they are scared. Okay, at their core, unfortunately, if you did not get a lot of healthy modeling for emotional vulnerability, it feels confronting. And it's not like they're sitting there shaking in fear, but it's like they really feel this ongoing sense of discomfort that then creates a sense of anxiety. And that anxiety may express itself as more irritability than outward, like, oh my gosh, I feel anxious, I feel scared. But they're feeling this sense of, I don't know if this is right for me. I don't know if I'm making the right decision. I don't know if I can do this. Am I even built for relationships? And they have this perpetual anxiety that precedes any kind of discard that tends to happen. And this is where you'll see that anxiety sponsor a behavior called flaw finding. And essentially what happens is when a dismissive avoidant feels too close to somebody and too vulnerable, or like there's too much pressure, they start trying to look for all the reasons that that person is not the right fit for them. And it's unfortunate because it's not really the most fair thing to the person on the receiving end of it. It doesn't feel good to know that somebody's flaw finding, but it's less about you and like these are your actual flaws and more about them making mountains out of molehills as a way to convince themselves that they'd be okay without you. And so what this then leads to in point number 2 is these devaluing behaviors. So you might see subtle criticism. Well, they're usually not very critical individuals of other people through words. They might start poking with these little bits of criticism. They may start showing up in ways where they tell you all the reasons why, hey, the relationship won't work anyways, or make comments about how you're so different from them, or, make comments about, oh, you always ask for too much. And you'll see these sort of behaviors that tend to push you away. And you can tell that like in their inner workings of their mind, they're going through these thoughts first that is then leading to them to externalize what they're saying, right? They're clearly citing flaws, showing or trying to, communicate flaws that they think you have. And these won't be huge things, but they will be subtle and they will be kind of consistent. You might see this happen a little bit more than usual. And again, I want to talk about what to do to approach these things, how to heal, how to make sure you set boundaries so that these things are not happening, how to know if you should even be staying in this relationship dynamic, because a lot of these things, they're not great to be on the receiving end of. They're quite unhealthy. And so we have to have a conversation a little bit as to whether or not these are even appropriate behaviors to have in a relationship and to stick in over time. If you want to dive a little more deeply into this topic, we have these 90-day attachment healing boot camps. You can get 7-day free trial access to them by your attachment style. And with that, you actually get a bonus gift, which is the attachment styles and intimacy course. So attachment styles and sex, it's all about how different attachment styles respond, what they need, what their fears are, what their unhealthy patterns are, and how to work through those things. And you get to actually keep that course for life for free as a gift when you check out the 7-day trial to your attachment bootcamp for healing. And I will leave that link down below. Here's a really interesting thing. And I would say this is the third out of 4 things. We'll get to the fourth at the end that tends to sort of show that they may be on their way to discarding. And it's that they start to replace the intimacy in your relationship with some sort of creature comfort. So it's a known fact that dismissive avoidants, they don't often soothe through people, they soothe through things. So you may see a dismissive avoidant spend all this time cleaning their car or being so interested in their car or tinkering with their belongings or things that they have this sort of unique interest to, or throwing themselves into work. These are things that they tend to derive this sense of soothing and identity from, whereas that's not something that they've been conditioned to feel comfortable doing in a romantic relationship or where there's too much vulnerability. So you might see all of a sudden, right before there's a discard, we see these other behaviors first, the flaw finding, the sort of devaluing behaviors, the slightly pulling away in regards to intimacy and curiosity about you. But then really this third piece here is that you'll start to see a big uptick where they're clearly starting to try to focus their attention and energy on things other than the relationship more than usual. And this could even be hobbies, work. It could even be like making a new friend or another person. And so you'll start to see these may be warning signs that a discard may be approaching. Okay, so we're going to talk about the fourth one at the end. But I want to share with you first just a little bit of neuroscience of what's actually, how this is impacting not just a dismissive avoidant, but what are the roots of these things for dismissive avoidance that lead to these types of dynamics. So there was a really powerful and interesting study done at the University of Virginia in 2006 by somebody named James Cone. And he did these hand-holding experiments, and he showed that emotional closeness reduces stress responses in the brain. Okay, so when we have this hand holding, what they actually found in the experiments is that people experience a drop in cortisol when their hands were being held, where there was this degree of emotional closeness, particularly with people that they tended to trust. But when dismissive avoidants are constantly cutting off emotional closeness, deactivating, diminishing this, not only does this not allow for us to feel soothed in a relationship with somebody else, but it can actually have an exact opposing response to stress. When people see that there's an actual attempt to disconnect, so let's imagine you're holding hands with somebody and somebody suddenly pulls their hand away, or when there are other devaluing behaviors that mimic this actually creates elevated cortisol in the brain. So this has an effect one way or the other. And we're always sort of moving towards one direction or another with a partner in a relationship. And this explains why, if you are the person on the receiving end of these things, these behaviors prior to this potential discard, why it can feel so dysregulating and why you may feel really unsafe if this starts to take place. Now, there's another study done in 2017 all about oxytocin research. And if you weren't familiar, oxytocin is the bonding neurochemical in relationships. And a woman by the name of Ruth Feldman actually showed that bonding behaviors like eye contact and affection regulate attachment. Whereas when an avoidant pulls away, this will dysregulate the connection between two people because oxytocin is dropping. And this actually creates relational distress. In fact, the absence of oxytocin reinforcement is something that leaves partners feeling abandoned. So this is what people actually experience at the brain level, psychologically. This is actually happening neurochemically to you. Okay, so I just want to use that information and research to honestly validate. If you're somebody who's struggling through this right now, or you're seeing some of these behaviors, it's okay to feel really uncomfortable right now. It's okay to feel a little bit scared or stressed or not really know what's going on. And this is where we have to have a conversation about what you can do here for a second. So I just want to talk for a moment about what you can do, how you can show up to approach this scenario so that you're, guarding your heart, that you're taking yourself into consideration in this process. And then we'll talk a little bit about that last major sign that tends to be the biggest. Here's the first thing. This video and the intent of this video is that you can notice these signs early without blaming yourself, without being in a place where you then judge yourself through their eyes. And I think this is really important to talk about because if you're fearful avoidant, if you're anxiously attached, there's a chance when you see these behaviors, you start making this mean things about you. You're like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not doing a good enough job. If I was just more ABC or XYZ, I would be liked more. I would be respected more. They would want to spend time with me if I was more like this or that. And it's so easy to fall into this trap. And trust me, it is an absolute trap. I've seen so many people go through this over the years. And all it does is there's this very subtle form of self-blame when you make somebody else's behavior mean something about you, your character, who you are as a person. And as soon as you get into that self-blaming cycle, not only do you reinforce your own core wounds, not only do you constantly fire and wire these neural pathways with these old narratives that you probably adopted from your own attachment wounds in childhood. Things like I'm not good enough, or I'll always be abandoned, or I'm unlovable, or this person's going to betray me. You probably picked those up in the past in painful ways. And now you're reiterating these things to yourself. And it's very painful and it's not going to help you. So I want you to be able to practice a very simple, easy neurolinguistic programming technique if you do see this, which is to interrupt. It's called a pattern interrupt. It's when you catch yourself going down the rabbit hole, I want you to say, cancel, cancel. If you're like, oh, it's because I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough, cancel, cancel. And I want you to reframe to reality, okay? And this is the cognitive reframe. So what we're going to do here, this is the cognitive behavioral therapy technique, is I want you to be able to actually look at the situation more objectively. Is this really about me being unlovable, or is this person maybe not available to me right now? So I want you to practice being able to reframe here, and that will be very helpful for you, okay? Now, a third really powerful tool or technique here is for you to set clear boundaries. And some of you are going to hear this and be scared. You're going to be like, I think they're already discarding me, or, these behaviors are indicating that. If I set a boundary, it might be the final straw where they do discard me. I want you to know that if you don't communicate your boundaries, you're on one of two paths. Path number one, by you people pleasing and self-silencing, they're just going to end up going down the same path and there will be a discard eventually if you're seeing some of these preceding behaviors. Or path number two, you can actually communicate about it. And if the person is interested enough to do the work to show up differently, then you'll actually hear them. They may not be perfect in how they approach things, but if you say, hey, look, I notice that we're disconnecting. I feel like things are not great between us right now, or things are sort of going down a path I'm not feeling great about. And I'm really needing ABC. And I want you to say specifically what you need. So this could be a little more consistency. And that looks like us having a fun date night this weekend, or a little more time together. That looks like a fun date night this weekend. A little more consistency. Us checking in before bed briefly over text. I want you to have like one or two really specific things that you can say. And you have to make sure you paint a picture for what this looks like. Because if you're too general and ambiguous, it won't often register fully with a dismissive avoidant. If you say, I want to spend more time together, they might think, okay, yeah, we'll chat on the phone for 15 minutes tonight. And then they think they spent more time together. So you have to be really clear and specific. And you put yourself in a win-win scenario this way because either the person shows up in response, and I will say, dismissive avoidants who are willing to do the work can show up and be phenomenal partners. But dismissive avoidants who don't, who aren't in that place, who aren't ready to show up and do the work, it is very hard to be on the receiving end of that in a relationship. You need to find out what's going on. If it feels like there's these, sort of discarding dynamics that may be showing up, I need to put an end to it right now. I need to be able to, honor myself, not blame myself. I need to be able to have a conversation to get to the bottom of it. So I'm not wasting my time in this gray area of not knowing. And so I can get to the bottom of and vet as to whether or not this person's capable of showing up in a healthy relationship. And the more you're able to find that out, the more you're looking out for yourself, the more you've got your own back in this process. Okay. And this reminds me of in Proverbs 23, it says, guard your heart above all else. And I don't think this is coming from a place of, oh, be on guard and be defensive and be scared, but it's you have to take yourself into consideration in relationships. You are the only person at the end of the day that is going to be able to truly guard your heart, show up for yourself, have your own back. And when you do that, you then give these signals and permission for other people to see what you're needing and what's important to you, and then they can show up for you and do the same. But statistically, historically, we see the same things time and time again. When people are not able to show up for themselves, it gives these signals to people in relationships around them that say, oh, well, you don't really have boundaries. You don't really have needs. So it's just about me in this relationship. And we actually teach people to treat us that way especially because 93% of communication is nonverbal. So if you're not having those boundaries, then you're giving that signal even more. There's another quote that I think is really meaningful here from the Buddha. He says, "You only lose what you cling to." And I think there's this really important dynamic here of if you're clinging so hard to an outcome, you are putting your focus and energy and intention in the wrong places. Where we want to be clinging to are the places that we have control. We have control over the conversations we have, the ways we show up, how we set our boundaries, how we communicate our needs. We don't have control over how people respond to that. But if we try to cling to how somebody could respond and try to control and manage that in advance, we do a massive disservice to ourselves in the process, and it doesn't help move the relationship along. In fact, it is more likely that you're going to see the outcomes that you're not looking for. The last major sign, and I would say this is probably the biggest sign that a dismissive avoidant may be on the discard, train, sort of like about to discard or pull away, is when you see that their communication really dries up. So if you're seeing that you used to communicate every day, even if it was just like a couple texts a day, and all of a sudden there's a couple days in a row regularly that you're not speaking to them or hearing from them, when there's a big shift in communication, unfortunately, a lot of times dismissive avoidants don't know how to have the conversation themselves, that they don't see themselves still participating in something, or they're not sure if this is a good fit for them. So they will retreat, hoping that you'll have that conversation or spark off that conversation for them to be able to have. And so when there's a big shift in communication there, that could be one of the most major signs. So my hope for you is that by listening to this video, you stop the self-blaming. You honor your truth. You honor your boundaries. You know how to approach these things going forward and have these healthy conversations. And in doing so, you are able to move the needle in this situation, to really heal, to grow, and to make sure that you're taking some of these skills and tools into potentially future relationships, should this one not be the right one for you. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe to this channel. I'd love to have you here as a part of our community, and I will see you next time.